things were so different for you and I back then because it was a dream. It was, I want to play in Europe. What path? There was no path. It was a pipe dream.
All right, here we go, Watford fans. Welcome to episode 2 of Captain America, representing the difference between USA and the UK. But nobody understands that more than the guy that we have today. The one, the only, the man, the myth, the legend, Tim Howard. How are you, pal? Doing well?
I'm great, Jay. Thanks for having me on. What's up, Watford fans? Kind of a crazy year, so I'm excited to chat all things.
Well, again, no one understands the Premier League more than you, especially being an American. But let's start in America. New Jersey, baby. New Jersey, born and raised. Then let's talk about development. You get to the end of, you're in the Metro Stars, you're playing in the kind of a small MLS league at the time. It's nowhere near what it is today. But then all of a sudden you get a scout call and you're like, hey, Manchester United, juggernaut of all juggernauts is that wants you. A, what's that like as an American? And then how do you actually get to the point where you sign with them?
Yeah. So it was interesting because, as you said, MLS was kind of in its infancy. It's still a very young league, but like where MLS is now is amazing. The players they can attract, the fees that they can sell their players on for, the stadiums, the fans. MLS is awesome. When I played, it was equally as awesome, but it was very, very much small. It was an opportunity to be a professional soccer player and, great breeding ground for me. But again, yeah, it was small fries, really. And it's still somewhat of a mystery how I got on the Manchester United's radar, because they're a club they were in need of a goalkeeper, and they had a World Cup winner, Fabian Barthez there. After me, a couple years later, they had Edwin van der Sar, who was absolutely world-class. So they can get any goalkeeper they want. So how they stumbled upon this kid from Jersey, I have no idea. But I got a phone call from their goalkeeper coach at the time, who was also in charge of the goalkeeper scouting. And it was a random call in January of 2002, maybe 2003. And yeah, just said, look, I thought it was a prank call. Hey, this is so-and-so United. And, we're going to keep an eye on you. And we like you. And we're okay. Yeah. I had no idea. I didn't know what to say back. I was like, all right, cool.
And had you known much about had you watched the Premier League? Like, were you into the kind of English Premier League before, or was it kind of like, what's over there? I know this league's awesome and amazing, and that's where the best players play. But like, that was kind of like me. Like, I watched it from afar, but I didn't know much about the Premier League. Did you?
I did. And the thing was, go back about 3 or 4 months, probably about November time. I was on trial or training trial at Feyenoord in Holland. And so that kind of was like the European flavor was on my radar. I don't know. I certainly, Premier League was hard because I was young. I wasn't able to qualify for a work permit. I knew that I wasn't playing full time for a national team. I hadn't quite broken in yet. That was to come in the next few months. So but again, things were so different for you and I back then because it was a dream. It was, I want to play in Europe. What path? There was no path. It was a pipe dream. It was just this little dream bubble above our head. Whereas the kids now, they say, I want to play for Chelsea, and then their agent sorts it out and they go. But for us, I was like, I want to play in Europe. What does that mean? I don't know. I just want to play in Europe, and I want to, it would be really cool. And so that was kind of it. It was on my radar, but I didn't know how to execute that.
Mm-hmm. And now you're there. You're playing with arguably one of the greatest managers of all time in Sir Alex Ferguson. And now you start to play. And I remember this so plainly because when I landed in the UK shores 2003, and this was your big 2003, 2004 was your big year for Manchester United. And I remember seeing this American guy that was winning Premier League player, a goalkeeper of the year. That's a big deal. And I remember thinking that, sitting in a pub, drinking a Guinness, going, wow, there's Americans doing really big things here. I hope I can play in that league one day. And again, I'm still playing in the 12th division, but I'm watching you on TV and I'm thinking to myself going like, hey, how does this guy get here? Now he's one of the best players in the league, which means now he's one of the best players in the world. Like, talk a little about like that. Like, what was it like in those locker rooms? How did you gain confidence to know that you could get out in again, Fabian Barthez, World Cup winner. How do you get out in that field with the guy like, Alex Ferguson, who picks you and then perform the way that you did?
Man, it was it was hard. I think it was just trying to keep my head above water. I was playing on pure adrenaline, raw athleticism, knowing that was kind of my bread and butter. When you talk about self-assessment and self-awareness, I realized I was in at the deep end. I realized I was, I wasn't quite ready for this moment. At the same time, you don't go knock on a manager's door and say, "Hey, I'm not ready." You figure it out. You sink or swim. And like I said, I was made some mistakes, sure. Had some great games, sure, because I was just using my raw athleticism and instinct, and that always served me well. But again, I was a 23-year-old little boy. I didn't know anything, and so that was really difficult. I think there's some hard moments. That's the thing that the outside world doesn't see about athletes is those moments of doubt. I said moments of doubt. Heck, you have a career filled with doubt, and then you try and brush it aside and push that closet full of demons closed just to get yourself out on the pitch, and hope to play well. And then that game.
Is Alex Ferguson in your ear at the time? Is he kind of pumping your tires a little bit, trying to get you pumped up for this opportunity, or is he kind of letting you be because he wants to see how you
that's the interesting thing. When you go to Manchester United, you're expected to learn very quickly. I think they understand you're going to make mistakes. You're going to be ridiculed for those mistakes, and then you're expected to quickly turn that around into success. If you don't, no problem. They'll get rid of you because they have enough money to bring somebody else in. That's how it works at top clubs. Sure. So there is no babying. There is no, hey, unlucky son. It's let's go. This needs to be better. And so, I remember my first, the hairdryer treatment was in the Community Shield. I ended up having success, saving some penalties, held up the trophy. But at halftime, Thierry Henry scored in the first half, bent it over the wall, and I got a massive talking to, which scared me to death. And so that was obviously, was there something behind that? Was he making sure I understood what the enormity of the situation? Of course he was, but I still got it.
Yeah. That's well, and again, so as you started to kind of understand the English game, did you notice a big difference between the US? Obviously you were playing in the MLS, which is very different than the Premier League. Can you talk about the differences maybe between them now and what they are when you were there, as far as was there tactical differences between the US systems and England? Was it just the atmospheres? What was the biggest difference that at the time that you thought was the difference between what you understood of soccer in America for 23 years to 23 to 26, holy crap, I'm getting into this English game. Sure. What's the difference for you?
I think the difference, even at the time in MLS, we had some top quality players, right? I think you had Stoichkov, those Chicago teams right under Bob Bradley, and Preki was in the league at the time. They were at the tail end of their career. You go to the Premier League and you're playing against 11 world-class players. The windows are opening and closing so very quickly, and you find out whether you belong or not in an instant. And so the difference was this quality and abundance, right? The pace. The Premier League in itself is the fastest league in the world. It's up and down. It's argy-bargy. But then you add on top of that the quality, right? Like you play against Arsenal, for example. That was the year of the Invincibles, and you're like, yeah, they have quality, but they'll also punch you in the mouth too. So it's and it's fast and it's furious, and it's there was so much that went into making the Premier League the greatest league in the world. And so it was, like I said, I had a taste of professional soccer, and every now and again when I played for the Metro Stars, we came up against this juggernaut Chicago Fire team who had these household names across Europe, but they were older, and it's oh yeah, that's what it kind of looks like. But then you get over there, and it's a whole different animal.
Yeah, I was saying that too. And then even almost that consistency, because even then you're oh, Preki's coming to town in 2 weeks and I get to play against this player.
Yeah.
That's amazing. But in the Premier League, it's every week. You look at that team sheet and you're oh, that world's best player from that world's best team is coming. Oh, now I got this guy next week, a Drogba, and then I got Ronaldo, and then I got Scholes, and then I got Van Persie, and then you got everybody. And so that for me, that was it. That was the consistency piece. It's you don't just got to play a big game against a big player when the team comes into town. It's you got to play against the big player 52 times in a season, plus cups, plus the other stuff, and play consistently in front of 75,000 with the pressure of a guy like Alex Ferguson. I think people really misunderstand how much that is to manage. not only like to your point earlier, this whole idea of like self-pressure, of like, how do you deal with the internal demon of like, am I good enough to walk out in front of 75? What if I make a mistake? You know, then you get 76,000. What's that like when you make 76,000 people go in?
Yeah.
You know, you make a save. It's great, but when you don't make a save, that pressure, I believe, and can you talk a little bit about that? Like, how do you, on a mental side, if you make a mistake in front of 76 at Old Trafford, how do you get yourself back on that bike to actually not keep that going?
Well, I think it's one of the most daunting feelings in the world. You know, personally speaking, we've all felt it. I think if you're going to play at the highest level and you're going to have success, you're also going to have failure. And I remember vividly the feeling of just wanting the ground to open up and swallow you whole, because there's nowhere to run, there's nowhere to hide. You hear the murmurs in the crowd, the boos. You know they're pointed at you, and there's nothing you can do other than try and make the next save. Yet your head is somewhere off in a distance because you don't want to be there anymore. It's mental warfare, and I've talked often about when it's mental warfare, it's self-preservation, and in the day of a game, the moment in the game, I often talked about having to go to a dark place, and obviously mental health is a really important issue, as it should be. But to be honest, one of the major key factors that allowed me to be successful was going to this really dark place by myself. Okay, my teammates are around me and I know the game plan. I'm not just out there, lollygagging on my own, but trying to block out voices and the crowd and, the negative thoughts, right? You go into a game and yes, you like to visualize. I'm someone who like to visualize the good moments, right? But every time you visualize the good moments, the bad moments creep in too, like the what ifs. And and that's real, and that's like constant, right? Like that's constant every single day. Roy Keane wrote in his book, and I got the great pleasure of playing against Roy Keane, one of the greatest players, certainly leaders I've ever known. And in his book, he talks about what winning does on a Saturday is it postpones the fear of losing for another 2 days. So you win Saturday, Sunday's cool, Monday's cool, but then by the time Tuesday rolls around, you're thinking, well, we'll play Chelsea in 4 days, and what if? And so that threat is always there. That fear is always there, and it's just so. I don't, that's how I handled it. Everyone handles it differently. Some people don't handle it. Some people succumb to the pressure. So it is very real.
100%. Now, again, you have those nice marks at Manchester United, and then your first move. Everton calls. Talk a little bit about that transition, coming from, a juggernaut like Manchester United, but then moving in what I saw into a much deeper and kind of more meaningful leadership role for Everton. And Everton was my first Premier League game. I got to play, against you on my first ever appearance in the Premier League. Yeah. I came off the bench to a loss. Unfortunately, we didn't get my first win against the Toffees, but I remember coming into that stadium at Goodison and just, I could tell you were a leader in that locker room. I could tell you were a leader in that stadium. And can you talk a little bit about the difference between the clubs and just you, and not only just your ability to now transition to a new team, but moving into Everton, what was the difference between the two clubs?
Yeah, so great question. I mean, and it was special that game was my first, Premier League game for Everton. I remember it well, and it was something I was looking forward to, as you said, playing at Goodison for the first time. With those fans that became my family and my home, and Everton just fit for me. I've often said Manchester United is the biggest football club in the world, and Everton is the greatest football club in the world. It was home. It was a working man's club. It was very, very much blue collar. Everybody who came to the Everton game and filled that those 40,000 seats were from the neighborhood. It was the move that I needed. When things didn't go well for me at Manchester United, they were up and down, really. I knew I wasn't going to fail. I knew I was just going to have to move and kind of continue to learn. And so, thankfully, Everton wanted me. I wanted Everton. I had a few other options, and I'm so happy that I chose Everton because it's just a different. This. It's a very, very much a classic British football club, that it still has that feel, it still has that steel siding on Goodison, and some of the steel siding doesn't match because they just kind of overlap it every time it gets a bit older. And it's it's brilliant. It's what British football is supposed to be. And I just found at home. It was me. It was all about me. And then I think the way David Moyes recruited, and we saw this prior to me with Phil Neville, and then myself, and then a few others, Louis Saha, and he was able to bring in players from the likes of Manchester City, Manchester United, that might have fallen out of favor, whether it be on loan or on a full transfer. And so you found that he was able to sprinkle in these players from bigger clubs, and immediately when that happens, you end up feeling like you have something to offer, and like you feel like you have this leadership role. There was a bunch of proper Scousers that played there that I looked up to immediately when I walked in the door. Tony Hibbert, Leon Osmond, Alan Stubbs, leaders. But at the same time, there's certainly a mark that you come in from Manchester United. There's an expectation that you know what the heck you're doing, and so you have to act like it. And I wore that like a badge of honor. 100%.
Now, I want to go into like just some of the best. So who was the best Premier League player that you played against? And I'm going to say I know you've scored a goal in the Premier League, and that doesn't happen very, very often. So I'm not going to say what's the best goal you scored in the Premier League, because that's already happened, and I know there's only the one. But talk a little bit about who was the best player that you watched come at you and or maybe scored a great goal on you. Talk a little bit about that, because you played against the world best players for a lot of years. Talk a little bit about the type of players that you faced every week, and maybe one moment that you clearly remember about, holy cow, that was a great finish.
Yeah. So I mean, I think the players that I respect and fear the most are probably the same as yourself, because once they chopped you, then they came past me and chopped me. So I think when we look at my 13 years in the Premier League, you have to Thierry Henry's number one. Thierry Henry is quite possibly the greatest Premier League player in the history, right? He was incredible for all the reasons. I think a very close second, and you'll remember, a young Didier Drogba. Young Didier Drogba he could jump like he was, shot out of a trampoline. He was powerful. He was strong. He could put you and me on his back and toss us around. Right foot, left foot. He could smash the leather off the ball. He could curl it into the corner. You just literally, I mean, he was a phenomenon.
That's funny you say that, because I was at that soccer convention this weekend, and I got asked that, who's the best Premier League player you played against, and that was my answer. It was Didier, because we had him in the FA Cup, even when we were in the Championship a couple of seasons. So I ended up playing against Chelsea like 4 or 5 times, and Dan, I don't know if you remember Danny Shittu, but Danny Shittu was like 6'4", like 240, like the biggest mountain guy you'll ever see. And I'd never seen anyone push up against Drogba, and Drogba just stood there, like he didn't move. And Danny Shittu, the biggest guy I've ever played with, couldn't move. And then he scored a brace against us and just was like laughing away. And we're just like, I'm like, wow, that guy. And that's what they asked me. So why? And I said, because I couldn't find a way to beat him. Mm-hmm. Like I can find like Rooney, you can push against him, you can make him physically, you can dominate him in a way. You got to find those little advantages as a defender. That's always what I was looking for. Sure. Find ways to disrupt, find ways to just get him out of that little headspace. And I couldn't find a way. Every time I played him, I couldn't find it. Couldn't push against him, couldn't beat him with the ball, couldn't close him down because he'd hit it from 25. You couldn't close him down quick because he'd push it past you because he was faster. Sure. And that's funny you say that, but I just remember those dominant years. And I think he kind of gets lost in that mix a little bit, I think, from the show, but he was insanity. Okay, so now let's talk about kind of the second half, the end of your career. You have an incredible career at Everton, arguably one of the best goalkeepers now ever to play for that club. And then do you want to come back home? Was that on your roadmap? Was it early? Talk a little bit about coming back? Because I'm the same. Like I wanted to come back at a time where I wasn't like in my geriatric years trying to pick up a paycheck and be that person. Like, did you come back with that in the whole idea of like, I want to play for a couple more years. I want to go to a place that I can use my leadership role, my experience. Talk a little about the transition into the MLS. And then maybe a little bit, what was the difference from when you left it in 2002, 2003 to when you came back in 2016?
Yeah, so, I was fortunate to have a lot of stability in regards to like contracts throughout my career. I wasn't rumored to move anywhere. I wasn't putting in transfer requests. They were happy, I was happy, and it was a match made in heaven. And so as the length of my contracts were long enough, and I could start to kind of plan, right? Obviously, things get thrown for a loop every now and again, but I could start to plan and say, like, oh, at the end of this contract, I'd like to, move, and I feel like the time was right for me to get back home, and I was 36, and so it felt right. And it was leaving Everton was really hard, but I was ready to be home. I was ready to be back in the States. Still wanted to play my football. Obviously felt like I had a lot to offer, and I was just so thankful. Again, very similar to the Everton move. I was just so thankful that Colorado ended up being the club that really wanted me, that really pursued me, because when I met the people and I knew a little bit about the club anyway, having played with the head coach Pablo Mastroianni, and he and I having that friendship, it was a place I wanted to be. Denver was a city I wanted to be in, and then I got a chance to meet the people up top, and mainly Porg Smith, who I think is absolutely brilliant, their general manager, and the Kroenke family. Everybody was just absolutely first class. And so when I moved there, there was a building process. There was a lot of, hey, how do we do this? How do we make things better, and how do we start to compete? And I think even we did it my first year, and then recently this year they were fantastic. And obviously with the playoffs, things don't always end the way they should, but that club is in a brilliant space at the moment, with some great people running it and some top players, and it's really good to see, because I feel like in my own way I was a small part of that fabric. And again, we talk about that family feel. I feel it, they feel it, and so it was the right time.
Yeah, and that was always something you talked about it a couple times. When you just feel it, you feel like they're getting what they want and I'm getting what I want. And the same that was my relationship with Watford. It just seemed to fit in both directions. It was never an issue. There was never any problems. There was never any things of questions of, oh, maybe he's leaving, or maybe, what I mean? It didn't make sense. And it seems like that worked for you in a lot of different ways throughout your career. And I mean, one of the things we ought to talk about too is just development. And you as a goalkeeper, is there a place that you can call on where you were thinking that you developed the most? Obviously, careers change, and throughout the careers, you kind of look at them as different like generations of like, this is my development phase. This is where I became a leader. This is where I became a role model because I was a leader. And then you move into leadership roles where you can affect the community deeper. You can affect the club deeper. So talk a little bit about your development as a goalkeeper and as a player. Like, is there a club or a place where you felt like you developed the most?
Yeah, I mean, it was probably my first year at Everton, because at Manchester United there was no time to think. It was no time to, I made a mistake, or I had a good game, and I was just trying to not make the next mistake, and I was just trying to have the next good game. So there wasn't a lot of time for development, although someone might argue that actually is development. But when I went to Manchester United, Everton, I sat down with David Moyes in the summer, right before I signed. Even like my contract ended up being structured to where, like, hey, you're going to play 40 games for us this year. So there wasn't like a, hey, don't do this, or if you do that, you'll be able to, like, my contract was structured to where they were saying, look, this is your team. Here's the keys.
Okay, yeah.
And when you get that kind of trust, you realize you can express yourself, and knowing I'm gonna go out and make this happen for the team. If I make a mistake, so what? We move on. We keep going. And so I had a great goalkeeper coach, Chris Woods, who was he's top. He's tippy top, and he's known all throughout England. Brilliant player, a fantastic goalkeeper coach, and that's really where my development started. Getting me on the training ground, not worrying about like who's the next guy to come in. Like, Tim's our guy, and any little tweaks to his game, because I was still only 26 years old. We're going to work on this. We're going to work on it diligently every single day, whether it be punching, catching, holding, putting balls in the right areas when we parry, whatever it is, we're going to work on it. And I just saw my development skyrocket during that first season, and then obviously subsequently.
So now, as you transitioned out of the game, obviously media loves people that have been there before. Obviously you've lived to that life probably more than most Americans, if not all, and now you get the chance to share it. You get the chance to react to it. Now you get the chance to be a pundit and look at, from the American shores, look at the Premier League every week and analyze it and be a part of that. And so you know, again, you've seen American soccer rise from the early 2000s to what it is now. And, you know, what do you think that the Premier League impact has been? Do you feel like, you know, again, I saw you at the Premier League Morning Live, that, you know, fans in North America are waking up at 3:30 in the morning to go watch their favorite teams. Like, that never, ever, ever would have existed in 2002. I know that. But like, talk a little bit about the transition, but now as you, as a pundit and someone that gets to look back at your experience and use that as a way to educate the soccer fans in America, how long do you think it's going to take before it's built into the grain of the fabric of this country? And how important are events like Premier League Live and Premier League Mornings that you're a part of every week? How important is that to the development of the game in America?
Well, I think that's right. I think when you know, NBC is doing such an incredible job, has done such an incredible job. I worked with the team in 2013-14, you know, and you know, a co-commentator back in England, because I was playing there and I was able to be on the gantry with Arlo and Graham and Lee, and now obviously in studio with Rebecca and Robbie. And so I think what gets lost is, as you said, what NBC has done is not only just cover football matches and show you highlights and give you analysis, but it actually has created this culture of soccer in America. It's become, it's created this fandom. It's become an educational tool. It's, you know, without sounding sappy, it brings people together. You know, like the amount of pictures that we see where, you know, a young dad is getting up with his baby and they put the shirt on and he's got his donuts and his coffee and he's watching the game, right? Like it's created this like almost family friend culture, right? Where it's connectivity. It's, hey, are you watching the Tottenham game? Did you get up and see? Like, and you don't see that. Well, you see that in a lot of other sports, but like the fact that you mentioned, it's 4 o'clock in the morning, 5 o'clock in the morning, 6 o'clock in the morning, depending on what time zone you're in this country. Like, this has become a following for people, right? It's become what they look forward to. Very similar to what you and I experienced. You know, when I woke up on a Saturday, all the Toffee fans talked about was getting up with my dad and my kid, and we're gonna put our shirt on and we're gonna go to the pub and then we're gonna get a pie and then we're gonna go to the game. And like, it became a rite of passage. It became like what they worked for all week, right? And so we see the same thing. People work and strive to get up Saturday morning at 4, 5, 6 o'clock in the morning to be with their family, to be with their wife or kid or husband or friends or however they connect. And so, yes, it's become more than just covering the league. It's created this connectivity.
Mm-hmm. I totally agree. And I think that culture, what I always say too, like when I walked Watford out, I had a badge that said 1881. And then when I walked Whitecaps out, it said 1974. And so we're almost 100 years behind in culture here in America. So I always tell Americans to slow down. Like, we're 100 years behind. Like, where I know we like to live in fast motion here in America, but we don't. We got almost 100 years to make up in culture to that point of. Because I used to get, it's bottom line, it's season tickets. And in MLS, a lot of the owners, season tickets, because that's revenues, that's whatever. And then they're trying to like promote marketing and all these other things. And I'm like, no, promote culture, because it doesn't matter if you win, lose, or draw. Like in England, you have the culture, you have the pies, the pub, the friends, the chants, and that goes whether you win, lose, or draw. So that season ticket's going to be bought no matter what. And I feel like in America, we're not getting to that point where we're not creating culture, we're not investing in the culture enough, because whether you win, lose, or draw with culture, you're buying the season ticket anyway. So I think they're getting the order wrong. It's the opposite.
Well, I think it's an interesting point. I think it's one that a lot of people who are watching this or listen to you talk, and anytime you do, I think it's important. I think that's probably the most important point when you talk about team, because, and this is my feeling too, right? The club, when I look at MLS, the best places I've played, the best stadiums I've seen, the best family, it is about culture, right? It isn't about a single result that build up, the results build up and you win championships. But it was about culture, it was about movements, it was about the color of the scarf, it was about the game day, match day feeling, because ultimately what I believe is, and this is why I've always talked about the fans being the lifeblood of the club. Managers come and go, no matter how great or how terrible. Players come and go, no matter how great, how terrible, it's a business. What doesn't is the club and the fans. The fans are there from mom and dad who handed it down to me, who it was handed down to them, and I'm going to hand it down to my own children. And you talk about this generational lineage. Like, that's where the clubs are found. That's what it's ingrained in the culture. And so I couldn't agree more that culture is what makes football clubs, not the wins and losses. The wins and losses, yes, of course they come, right? But in any given year, no matter how successful you are, you might have a really bad year. That's okay, right? As long as the culture is in place.
100%. Last question. Future of Americans in the Premier League. Do you see more? Do you see them spreading out the wealth so they actually don't come to England as much? We'll talk a little bit about the young guns of America and how they've gone out and really started to put a stamp on the world game. And do you think that more will end up in the Premier League, or do you think because we have a wide variety of players in America now that they will just continue to spread out to all the leagues?
I think the argument is simple. If I took 10 of America's best young talent and asked them to list where they want to play in order, all of them without question would say the Premier League. That's where everyone wants to be. Are there other good leagues? Of course there are, but everyone wants to be in the Premier League. Not everybody can. It's difficult. Do I think we're going to see this mass exodus of American players playing the Premier League? No, I don't think so, because I think it's too difficult of a league. It's too difficult of a league to find a footing. America is still clawing for respect, and for every good American, a club can go into Africa, into Asia, into all parts of Europe, into South America, and get an even better player. Like that's the facts. And so we'll always have to scrap and claw to get into the Premier League because it is such a difficult league.
Totally agree. Well, again, we don't want to take up too much of your time. I know you're a busy guy, but always appreciate your time and obviously your experience, as English fans and America appreciate. I always say the best goalkeeper I ever played with is Tim Howard. And, again, your experience is unreal. And now your knowledge of the game is something that's huge for passing on to the next generation. So again, appreciate your time and your knowledge. And we'll definitely see you at the back post soon for some bevies and some good chat. But thanks for coming down, Tim. I know Watford fans will appreciate everything you brought to the game in the UK. And we'll see you next time.
Well, I appreciate all the Watford fans. All the best this season to staying up. My thoughts and hopes are with you. So
gonna happen, Roy boy.
Yeah.
In Roy we trust.